866-957-2874, 866-95-Patriot. Lots of ground to cover tonight. We're going to get to all of it. But the really interesting thing is the debate about climate change within the Democratic presidential primary. The Democrats are taking shots at each other, and a little bit of a throwdown, Rebecca, between Joe Biden and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Biden saying he wants to find a compromise, and she's saying no compromise allowed.
Exactly. And let's just listen to that clip. The clip of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez making this statement. It was at a speech that she gave today before that Sunrise Movement. That's the group that's really been this grassroots organization that has really been championing her Green New Deal. So she gave a speech before them. It was played on C-SPAN, and let's listen to this clip where she says, basically no middle of the road for her when it comes to this issue. Clip 15, please.
And I will be damned if the same politicians who refused to act then are going to try to come back today and say we need a middle of the road approach to save our lives. That is too much for me.
Wow. So now Joe Biden, the 2020 contender, former vice president, he was asked about this. And, basically everybody felt that she was taking a shot at him because he is considered, the moderate in this race for whatever that means for the Democrats now. And let's listen to what Joe Biden said in response. Let's play clip 18.
I've never been middle road on the environment, and I tell her to check, the statement that I made and look at my record. She'll find that nobody has been more consistent about taking on the environment and a green revolution than I have. And so, look, anyway, but I can't, I don't think she was talking about that. This idea that I haven't done anything, take a look at the record. That's what I'd say. I'm sure she will get time to look at it.
Take a look at the record, she says. And he also, told folks to just calm down on this issue until he releases his plan on the environment. So he was having none of that. Now, Joel, in the speech today, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez made a lot of statements about the environment. And to unpack, fact from fiction when it comes to these things, I want to bring in our first guest, Caleb Rossiter, who is a climate statistician for the CO2 Coalition. Caleb, welcome to the show this evening.
Rebecca and Joel, it's great to be on the Patriot channel. I listen to you every morning. I bounce back and forth between you and POTUS to keep my head right in the middle.
All right. Well, Caleb, I want to play for you the opening statement from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's speech today, where she gives some stats about CO2 levels. And I want to get your take on this, whether you can explain this to us. Let's listen to clip 2, folks. Captain Mike.
It was reported today that this weekend, for the first time in human history, we have reached atmospheric levels of carbon at 415 parts per million. This has never been seen in recorded human history. In fact, meteorologist Eric Holthus and journalist said simply about this measurement and development, we do not know a planet like this. The last time our planet hit 415 was in the Pliocene period. Oceans were 90 feet higher. Bacteria and diseases we have never seen before roamed the earth. Humans did not exist. We have never seen a planet like this. And a planet like this is exactly what we are going to get. And it is exactly what we are going to inherit from previous generations if we do not act positively now.
Well, there you have it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying that we have 415 particles per million, and we haven't seen anything like this in recorded human history, and not since the mastodons roamed the earth or whatever. Caleb Rossiter, from the CO2 Coalition. What is she saying here? What does this mean? And is this? It sounds awfully scary. How should we interpret this?
Well, we'll have to wait a few weeks and see if she takes this back. Just yesterday, she announced that she didn't really mean it when she said we have to get rid of the 85% of the energy in the world that comes from fossil fuels because we have 12 years to live. Now she's telling us she was just joking. So we'll see what she says in a few weeks. But this was quite a collection of irrelevant facts. I'm a college statistics professor, and I can tell you when people think that just because two things occur at the same time, one causes the other, they make the biggest mistake in statistics. Every 100,000 years, the world goes through a very well-documented cycle of temperature. It goes up or down about 6 degrees, which is globally over that period, having to do with the orbit of the Earth around the Sun slightly changing its shape. And when it's very high in temperature, as it is now, as it was 100,000 years ago and 200,000 years ago, because of that, you get very high levels of carbon dioxide because as the frozen areas melt, it releases carbon dioxide. It has nothing to do with fossil fuels, us being at a very high level of carbon dioxide and high level of temperature. It's simply where we come to after the ice age of 12,000 years ago as we move to this high that we get every 100,000 years. It's a pretty, it sounds very scary, but 400 parts per million is 4% of 1% of the atmosphere. Before the carbon dioxide era, before we started to burn fossil fuels, it was 3% of 1% of the atmosphere. All that has happened from that 1% of 1% growth of carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere is that the Earth has greened. NASA has confirmed it. The UN has confirmed it. We have 15 to 30% greater plant growth now because carbon dioxide is a plant food.
So we're literally talking about 4% of 1%, and
Yep.
whereas before it was 3% of 1%.
Exactly. Now it's a change that should bring some warming, maybe on the maybe for a doubling in 100 years of CO2, we would get maybe to 1 degree more than we are today. But the projections for years, 20, 30 years of the Democrats, and I say that as a good Democrat myself, I've run for Congress as a Democrat, I was a Democratic staffer on the Hill, but they've kind of lost their minds on this, and every few years they tell us that the temperature is going to go up 4 or 5 degrees and raise the oceans. They just have an apocalyptic vision of the world, whether it was overpopulation was going to ruin us or running out of food. The latest one is burning fossil fuels. It's a strange thing to see. I'm glad Ms. Ocasio-Cortez has forced the Democrats to take a stand because if they believe I think Ms. Pelosi, who I respect greatly, says there's an existential climate crisis. That means our existence is threatened. And in your clip, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez says, it's going to kill us. It's just it's kind of insane, but I do try to go up in Congress and talk to them about the data, which show during this era no increase in the rate of sea level rise, no increase in the number of hurricanes, no increase in the number of droughts. These are the UN data, but they just keep, pulling more facts and figures out of the air that we have to chase around. Right now, the only thing you can say about fossil fuels is that they've been a gift to the world. They've raised life expectancy by 30 or 40 years per person. 20 years in China alone in the last 30 years. And frankly, the rest of the world wants to develop like us, and we need to help them.
We hear so much also from the UN. Just, last week we had this UN report declaring that millions of species were going to go extinct, plant and animal species, if we don't act now. Again, presumably about
you never
climate
quite
change.
know. Well, you don't know. Well, no, they actually tack climate change on the list of things that had killed species. Although these are all theoretical species that they can't name. It's sort of computer runs again. It's just a little more hysteria to try to take down, I guess, the developed countries and their economic growth. What really troubles me, as someone who's worked on Africa as well, is only 25% of the people in Africa have electricity. That really correlates with life expectancy. They can't drive their industry. They can't get healthy. And we used to help them. We used to help them build power plants with World Bank loans. Now the U.S., under the Obama administration, cut off World Bank loans for fossil fuel plants in Africa. Are you kidding? I mean, we've got people who need power, and we're worried about these mythical, some years from now, carbon dioxide effects, when there hasn't in the last 30 years, even according to the UN. They keep making these projections, but their own data, which I used at a congressional testimony in front of Ms. Ocasio-Cortez just 1 week ago. She refused to question me, but she'd rather go out in the hall with the Sunrise Movement and try to shout me down. It was quite humorous. But the data I put on the screen were all UN data, that there's no increase in these climate variables. Where is this fear coming from?
This is a great point that you just also made about the developing world and the needs of the developing world, that we have people that could desperately, in countries that could desperately use electricity and electrical power grids and all of this, and the fact that we're holding people back because of the this fear of fossil fuels and all that. It seems to me, when we look at where the problem is with polluting and all of that, so much of it actually comes from the third world. When you are worried about when you're worried about subsistence, you're not really concerned all that much about clean air and water and all of that. And the world's worst polluters, the data is there. I mean, the most polluted cities are in places like Ghana, Ukraine, Bangladesh, Zambia, Nigeria. The most deforestation occurs in these places, right?
But Rebecca, the reason why is when you get wealthy, then you can spend your money cleaning up the water and air like all the developed countries have done. We're much less dirty in the water and air than we were 50 years ago because we got rich enough to afford it. In Africa, there's something going on called the dieselization of Africa. Because the power shuts off all the time, because we haven't helped them make their power grid, every business, every rich person, every university, every government office has a giant diesel generator out back if you're in Zambia, Nigeria, Sudan, wherever. And they crank up that generator when the blackouts and brownouts come every day, and it spews particulate matter. Well, I won't even tell you what it's like to be behind a diesel generator in Lagos, Nigeria. That's what kills people. Particulate matter, which when they're burning wood or cow dung in their huts to stay warm and to cook, they should have electricity where they wouldn't have particulate matter at all. That's what's killing people, the lack of electricity.
And this is what you get to the point I was going to make exactly, which is that if, we should be trying to develop these areas, trying to, bring sustainable power grids, even if it's, fossil fuel, partially fossil fuel and all that, because that, as you said, when we raise up the economic status of a country and raise them, suddenly they are more concerned about the environment. They have the ability to protect the environment. We've seen this again and again. So I don't understand if she is so concerned about the world ending because of our carbon footprint. Why isn't she moving towards something like nuclear power generated energy plants and things like this?
I certainly can't speak for the Democratic Party's sort of logic on this because it goes back to the science. I run a coalition of 46 scientists, atmospheric scientists, agronomists, people who actually work in the data and left the UN process, Rebecca, in horror after about 10 years of representing their countries at the UN, at these crazy political exaggerations. The UN body is not a scientific one. They have scientists working for them, but it's a political body governments control. And for some reason, they have decided that they want to end economic growth, population growth, that people are sort of scared of the future, even though the world's only gotten richer as we've gotten larger, because, people are not just takers and users. People are also the geniuses who create, like the fracking revolution, which has created tremendous cheap power for America. According to the United States government data, saves 11,000 lives a year in America because the price of natural gas dropped and poorer people could afford to heat their homes in the winter in New England and the Midwest rather than cut back because they couldn't afford it. That's 11,000 real lives saved every year because of the fracking revolution and natural gas. And natural gas, of course, doesn't even have the sulfur dioxide that burns out of coal, so it's a much cleaner fuel. You don't have to scrub it. And I was at a left-wing think tank called the Institute for Policy Studies back around 2013, 2014, began to write about this. And I said to them, what, aren't you guys for natural gas? Because it reduces, the the sulfur dioxide that comes out of coal, that has to be scrubbed out at great expense. They said, no, we're against anything with fossil fuels. And then they said we're against nuclear, and we're against dams because it drives people off their land, so we can't have hydroelectric power. I mean, I finally said, you guys are essentially for any kind of energy except the ones that work.
That's you get it right there. That's exactly what my concern is about this. Is it's like a utopian vision. I mean, every single innovation, there's always a trade-off. I mean, and I'm for an all of the above approach when it comes to energy. I mean, I'm for green energy. I'm for fossil fuels. I think we should have an all of the above approach.
As long as you get it for a good price. It's not fair to say to people you can use solar when it costs 10 times as much to keep the solar grid going, and also you need a coal-fired or natural gas-fired plant to maintain the solar grid because it has to be reliable and regulated. You can't just tell people you should pay 10 times as much for your heating fuel because they'll stop using it. The whole thing comes down to science. Is there any evidence from the last 50 years that the increase in carbon dioxide has led to more extreme weather? And even the UN data say the answer is no. People can read this at the UN site or come to our CO2 coalition site. I mean, it's just a kind of lunacy that's going on, and it's what's driving the debate. If you believe the world's going to end, of course you'd get rid of fossil fuels. Where are the data?
Well, here's the other thing. When we talk about, an all-of-the-above approach to energy and things like this, if we have an all-of-the-above approach and if we're investing in all these different things, we're going to find innovation. We're going to find better ways of doing things. We're going to find cleaner ways of doing things, as we have. It seems to me
it's much more efficient. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We're much more efficient than we were 15 years ago. The fracking revolution has dropped the price of energy everywhere because, of course, oil and coal have to compete with the gas. Energy is much more reliable, much cleaner, much more efficient. We're going in the right direction. Economic growth is very strong. And the best way to be healthy in this world, no matter what the challenge is to get your country wealthy.
So when we talk about the plan here for something like the Green New Deal, it seems to me. Okay. I know I don't want to make you get into politics with you because I know that you stick to the numbers. But here's the question that I have though: is they see, and maybe you saw this with your work at the UN. They seem to be injecting things that don't necessarily have to do with the climate. Things about we can't have as you mentioned, we can't have any hydroelectric plants because that means that we're going to have to take land away from people to build these dams. In the Green New Deal, legislation or resolution or whatever they want to call it that was introduced, there was all this stuff about, we have to have affordable health care for individuals, which I don't know what that has to do with the climate. Do you think that the agenda when it comes to, non-government organizations or the UN and all that, are they really concerned about the climate and about the environment, or is this something else involved here? Is this sort of, an economic thing? Are they using the climate for some sort of an economic agenda?
Well, at the moment, it's a political agenda because the polling shows, and moderate Republicans are squeezed by this, along with the Democrats, that people ages 20 to 40 in America, a huge percentage of them believe that carbon dioxide poses an existential threat to America. So if you want their votes, even though they're wrong, people start to move towards them. So I think there's some politics here. Look, at the hearing I was at last week, Representative Tlaib was there along with Representative Ocasio-Cortez and had the chance to question me. Mostly they made speeches of me saying things like, I know children with asthma in Detroit. I know people who are depressed, people who are obese, people who are, men beating women because it was a hot summer. Like all this list of things, depression, these kind of cuckoo things, everything's caused by heat that came from carbon dioxide, even though the UN itself says the 1 degree rise, which is a typical fluctuation in the last 100 years, only a quarter of it is certainly from carbon dioxide, a quarter of a degree. And we've got serious people talking about, in these hearings, testifying and saying climate change causes obesity, causes depression, causes asthma, violence against women. It has absolutely no statistical evidence that is the case, yet people just keep saying it and saying it and saying it. So they're riding the words climate change that really don't mean anything. You have to always ask them, as I did, which climate change do you mean? Hurricanes, weather, hurricanes or storms or heat. They're using climate change because it polls extremely well. That's it.
And when it's something that, the weather, controlling the weather. I mean, if we could all control the weather, we would be, millionaires or billionaires by now, right? So,
well, it's kind of funny because the whole climate change thing started with climate modelers after World War II, led by the great Professor von Neumann for the Department of Defense, the War Department, trying to model the climate so they could figure out how to cause droughts in the Soviet Union as a weapon. And these were the most brilliant mathematicians of the time. They'd all worked with Oppenheimer and Einstein. And they gave up after 3 years because you can't model the climate. It's too crazy. It's too chaotic. You can't seed clouds to bring more rain consistently. It just doesn't work. We have a huge chaotic system. Everything that they said in that crazy U.S. report that the Trump administration put out last fall, because they couldn't control the old scientists who were there, that said there's climate change is threatening us. They show pictures of a flood here and droughts there and the seas washing up here. But their own data show them that there's no trends in these over the last 50 years, so there's no global warming effect on these variables. Yet they keep putting out extreme weather and saying, see, that's climate change. That's probably the biggest lie, the biggest confusion. People these days have been so propagandized, when they see a storm, they think that was caused by people driving their SUVs. We've had storms, droughts, floods, hurricanes for hundreds of years, well documented, at rates no higher than today, period.
Yes, since ancient times, you could say we've had famines and plagues and all sorts of things.
And locusts, yes, locusts.
Yeah, it's happened for quite some time now in human history. But, it makes the perfect villain, the perfect, for any political figure, because it's nebulous, it's always changing, you can't really solve it. So whatever solution that you come up to combat it, can coincidentally also align with whatever political agenda you have. So it's a great, thing to fight. If you want to pick a villain, climate change is the perfect villain. But, as you say, I think...
I would say that. I just want to get back to one point you made earlier because I feel I can answer. You asked me what's driving this. I had a dear friend who worked at a left think tank, Institute for Policy Studies, named John Pfeffer. And when I tried to point out to him in writing, we exchanged this stuff, that there really weren't these climate changes caused by CO2. He said, yes, but Caleb, you don't get it. This issue is Archimedes' lever. If we stand on it at the right point, we can get the whole ball of wax. We can get rid of the growth economy. We can get rid of capitalism. We can get rid of the fossil fuel power of the fossil fuel companies. This is a tool. I would say from that conversation, I realized for the first time, this is a tool. This is Archimedes' lever for the left to go after capitalism.
I actually believe that he was being completely honest and candid in that
moment
there.
Oh, yeah. He's a great guy, and he was saying it as saying, look, his position was more like, these are good things anyway. We'd like to move in the socialist direction. So whether it's true or not, it's good to pursue this climate change business because it's going to allow us to get what we want.
Which is so sad because as we circle back to our original point, the best way to help the environment is to raise everyone up economically, especially the third world, so that they have the ability to, be better caretakers of the environment in their countries.
If you think that everybody's evil who makes money, which is what the Democratic candidates for president seem to think these days, there's something wicked about making money, in tech business and trading and fossil fuels, then of course you don't want to see these corporations that can help spread wealth. I just don't understand how they can look at the history of the last 50 years and talk about socialism. This is the path to growth. I work in Africa a lot. People want a good functioning capitalist economy so that they can grow and join the rest of the modern world. That's what we should be focusing on.
You know what, Caleb Rossiter, I want to thank you so much for joining us. You're from the CO2 Coalition, a climate statistician. Great comments. They're great work there. Great explanation for us. I really appreciate it. Folks, you're listening to Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour. We're taking your calls next. Our number, 866-95-PATRIOT. Stay with us.